Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're going to peel back the onion on a topic that is literally dominating dinner tables, group chats, and headlines all over the world right now. We're looking at exactly why owning a home, something that used to be just a standard, almost expected milestone of adulthood, feels like an absolute unattainable fantasy today. We're going to break down the actual mechanics behind the madness and show you exactly how we got here.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to untangle this massive topic layer by layer. We'll start with the unaffordable housing reality, then look at the mortgage math trap, zoning and supply shortages, investors and hedge funds, the shift from homes to investments, and finally wrap up with some potential solutions and what the future might actually look like.
So, part 1, the unaffordable housing reality. If you're a millennial or Gen Z, you already know the extreme frustration of this market. People are basically coping through highly ironic, cynical humor right now. There's this viral TikTok trend joking, "Should have got a nice cheap loan when I was a fetus." And alongside all the jokes about, renting a 3-square-foot closet for $8,000 a month, there's a really profound truth here. Young people feel like they're being punished for simply being born too late, like they lost a game they never even had a chance to play. And while social media definitely exaggerates, reality is honestly just as wild. Take New Zealand, for example. They have this slang term donger, which describes something old, broken down, and barely functional. Well, in early 2021, an uninhabitable, boarded-up donger sold for $1.81 million in Auckland. Let that sink in. Buyers were literally treating the trading of broken-down bungalows as a totally normal, wise financial strategy. To put that into perspective, back in the 1960s, a single-income earner could buy a house for about 2 to 3 times their yearly salary. Fast forward to today, and in the US, that ratio has jumped to 5 or 6 times the median household income. And at the absolute peak of the Auckland market, the average home cost a staggering 35 times the median income. 35 times! Which brings us to part 2, the mortgage math trap. Now, you might be wondering, what's actually driving this? Let's look at the mathematical mechanics. Most buyers don't shop by the total house price, right? They shop by the monthly payment. So, say you have a budget of $1,500 a month. Back in 2021, at a 2.65% interest rate, that got you a $370,000 home. Today, at around 6.5%, that exact same $1,500 payment only buys about $236,000 worth of house. Your borrowing power dropped by a third without you doing anything wrong. And this perfectly illustrates why falling rates push prices up and rising rates completely freeze the market, because current homeowners absolutely refuse to give up those cheap locked-in mortgages. But it gets worse because modern buyers aren't just fighting interest rates. They're caught in what's known as the dual income trap. Decades ago, a single income family was basically just bidding against other single income families. Today, you're competing against dual income households, which naturally just inflates market prices across the board. And those same dual income families are burdened with massive childcare costs, averaging around €250,000 to raise a single child to 18. So it's this weird paradox where you have more purchasing power pushing market prices up, but way less actual disposable wealth in your pocket. And because of all this, 43 is now the average age of a first-time homebuyer in Dublin. 43. This fundamentally shifts the entire market. Mid-40s buyers usually command higher salaries, and they demand forever homes right out of the gate. Because of that, starter homes are practically becoming obsolete. That chokes the supply of secondhand inventory even more because people simply aren't trading up or down the property ladder like they used to. All right, part 3, zoning and supply shortages. So if prices are so incredibly high, basic economics says we should just build more houses to meet the demand, right? So why aren't we? Well, the data shows that the lack of supply isn't some weird accident. It's actually a direct byproduct of baked-in planning laws and political dysfunction operating all across the developed world. There are these massive, interlocking roadblocks that just choke off supply. Many cities have incredibly strict zoning laws that completely ban high-density apartments. Then there's NIMBYism, not in my backyard, where existing owners fiercely fight new developments just to protect their own property values. Add in historical baggage like the UK's 1947 Town and Country Planning Act that drew restrictive green belts, or wild California regulations that actually forced wildfire victims to rebuild the exact same structures that just burned down. All of these rules practically guarantee scarcity. Let's move to part 4 and see how this builds. Investors and hedge funds. Here's where the structure of who you're actually bidding against at the open house changes. Regular families are no longer just competing against each other. In the US right now, 1 out of every 4 homes is purchased by investors. And we aren't just talking about a retired couple buying a second home to rent out. We're talking about massive Wall Street hedge funds like Blackstone purchasing tens of thousands of single-family homes and turning ordinary neighborhoods into permanent rental portfolios or short-term Airbnbs. And that leads to something called zombie houses. These are homes bought by investors and left completely empty. They're treated purely as financial assets just waiting for prices to rise. This phenomenon severely exacerbates the housing shortage, and it really proves that giant companies care way more about extracting profit than, actually providing a place for people to live.
Which perfectly tees up part 5, from homes to investments.
This brings us to the real philosophical core of the crisis, the ultimate contradiction of modern housing policy. Think about it. Housing as a basic need requires prices to remain low and affordable. But housing as an investment requires prices to go up forever to guarantee returns. You literally cannot have affordable housing for young people while simultaneously guaranteeing endless investment returns for older homeowners. It is mathematically impossible. And since roughly 65% of Americans already own homes, politicians face a totally brutal choice. They can either allow housing prices to drop, which would completely infuriate their most reliable voting bloc, or they can maintain artificially high prices, which preserves the wealth of older voters but completely sacrifices the financial mobility of the younger generation, and historically, governments logically choose the latter. As a result, the famous property ladder has become a cruel game of snakes and ladders. Millennials find themselves stuck in depreciating leasehold flats, unable to trade up to family homes because those prices have drifted completely out of reach. And the economic fallout for society is huge. We're seeing a mass exodus of productive, talented workers fleeing highly expensive cities like Auckland and London for places like Australia or Texas just so they can afford to, start a family. Finally, let's look at part 6, solutions and the future. So how do we actually ungum this broken system without collapsing the entire banking sector? Well, one theoretical solution championed by economists is the land value tax. Originally proposed by 19th century political economist Henry George, this is a single tax levied on the underlying value of the dirt itself rather than the productive structures built on it. By heavily taxing the land, it discourages hoarding. It basically makes it way too expensive to sit on a vacant lot or a zombie house, forcing owners to either build on it or sell it to someone who will. Alongside tax reform, experts point to 3 main systemic fixes. First, implement sweeping zoning reform to allow smaller, high-density units. Second, restrict corporate hedge funds from gobbling up single-family starter homes. And third, end generous tax benefits for multi-homeowners. The sources make it very clear. Without changing these fundamental structural rules, simply handing out first-time buyer bonuses will only increase demand and push prices even higher. So is renting the new normal? Until housing is returned to its original purpose, a place to live, rather than a leveraged tech stock with a roof, an entire generation might be permanently locked out of the dream. The math is definitely hitting a ceiling. Thanks so much for joining this explainer. What do you think the future of housing looks like? Let us know and keep seeking to understand the world around you.